Welcome everyone to our webinar, Kickstart Your 2023 EV Funding and Regulation Game Plan, brought to you by Southern California Edison and ACT News. My name is Bree Lawrence. I'm a Vice President at Gladstein, Neandros & Associates, also known as G&A. Today we'll be talking about how your fleet can start planning for the year ahead to take advantage of funding and the latest on which zero-emission regulations are coming. We have a great lineup for you today. I'll be here to talk about funding and some of the critical changes that have been put into place to make money even easier to access for fleets. I am joined by Ramiro Lepe, Senior Advisor, E-Mobility Business Development and Partnerships, who will be sharing how Southern California Edison is here to help you with your fleet electrification plans by offering completely free, hands-on assistance to prepare your fleet's EV funding applications. We also have Matt Schrapp, CEO at the Harbor Trucking Association, who will be sharing the latest on the developing Advanced Clean Fleet rule and what this could mean for you. We are structuring today's webinar as a conversation between us speakers, and we want to hear from you. We are here to answer your questions and to connect you with resources to support you as you get started. We are going to end with plenty of time, and we are going to answer as many of the questions as we can. So here's some housekeeping. Before we get started, please do keep in mind, like I said, we're going to have around 20 minutes for Q&A. Please submit any questions that you have by using the Q&A box located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Please direct your questions to the organizer. A recording of the webinar will be sent out next week to the email address you used to register. It will also be available on the ACT News website. Should you encounter any technical issues and need assistance during the webinar, please use the G&A marketing email address you see on the screen. We will also drop that email in the chat and quickly assist you with any issues that you have. And at the end of the webinar, before closing out, we kindly ask that you complete our 30-second survey. Please also use this as an opportunity to let us know what you would like to see in future webinars. Okay, now we are going to get started. So 2023 is on track to be a really critical year for fleets for a couple of reasons. One reason is that there are historic zero-emission regulations that very well could be decided in the next few months and have huge impacts across the state. And the second is all of the money that is flowing in to help fleets transition, particularly to zero-emission technologies. But where do you even begin? How should you go about combining opportunities? Who's here to help you? Especially if you're smaller, mid-size, that's what today is all about. We're going to look ahead at the year and we're going to give you tools and resources to help you kick off. So, Matt, I'm going to kick it over to you and have you get us started by level setting around what is Advanced Clean Fleet, what's the latest, and if this is approved this spring, what is going to be the impact?
Well, thank you, Bree, and good morning, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity here to get to address some folks directly about, obviously, as I think as Bree put it, very appropriate, historic regulatory efforts towards transportation and zero emissions. We are on the cusp right now of really seeing a major sea change in how the state of California especially approaches regulating emissions from heavy duty vehicles. Obviously, in our role here at the Harbor Trucking Association, our main focus has been and will remain on trucks that do business at ports and, to a lesser extent, intermodal rail yards throughout the West Coast. Our membership ranges from the small 1-2 truck operator all the way up through some of the largest fleets in the entire country. We pride ourselves on being a resource for them and providing educational tools, as well as an advocacy and a voice, if you will, for those regulators and other lawmakers who are attempting to modify the way that we do business. The Advanced Clean Fleets rule has really been evolving almost over the last 2 to 3 years. Where we are at now is we've seen a final version of the regulatory language, or a draft final version of the regulatory language that was released late last year. Comments were due in October. There were some small modifications at the hearing, where we'll be seeing now the final hearing adoption for this rule. It should be on April 27th is what it looks like it's been scheduled for. So on April 27th, the state of California Resources Board will vote to adopt the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule. It's pretty straightforward for drayage trucks. While it becomes a little more complicated for phase-in percentages for high priority fleets, those are fleets that own more than 50 trucks, make more than $50 million in revenue and own one truck, or dispatch up to 50 trucks collectively, that there is a specific pathway relative to a percentage of total overall fleet by GVWR category. While drayage, on the other hand, is very cut and dry. Their proposal, which we will see in April, or excuse me, which we will see likely voted on in April in this same stature, is that come 1/1/24, any first-time VIN entrant being put into the statewide drayage truck registry will need to be zero emissions. That is not a internal combustion engine in the way technology exists today. We are looking at either battery electric or hydrogen. And battery electric is a little bit further along in the commercialization process. So it is very likely that folks will be looking at what is needed to install the necessary infrastructure, as well as procure the number of vehicles that will be necessary to keep their business up at levels where they are able to be successful. So 1/1/24, we have this standard. That means if your truck is put into the drayage truck registry after this date, it will need to be zero emissions. That is a certified tailpipe zero emission standard coming from the state of California, which again, at this point can only be met through battery electric or hydrogen technology. Now, vehicles that are currently registered into the drayage truck registry or were registered into the drayage truck registry leading up to the end of last year will have an opportunity to re-register into the new drayage truck registry, which should be out hopefully sometime within the relatively near future, where you put the information relative to your truck, VIN, engine year, engine family, etc. And then now you will be back into and allowed into marine terminal facilities throughout 2023. Now, if these vehicles are put into the drayage truck registry prior to the end of 2023, that's this year. So if you have a vehicle that's put into the DTR before 12/31/2023, then it will be grandfathered in and allowed to continue to operate until it reaches its useful life threshold. So within a slide, we have an actual breakdown matrix of the useful life threshold that can be helpful for folks as a quick, easy reference guide to determine when exactly you may be forced to turn over your equipment. So we're on the cusp of that at this point in time. There is an upcoming workshop on February 13th, which will be held in person and virtually up in Sacramento. So if you have not signed up for that already, please do if you're interested in learning more about the rule. But for all intents and purposes, this particular version that they'll be bringing to us is generally the same when it comes to the entry standards starting 1/1/24. And there are clarifications in requesting exemptions for delivery delays either on zero emission vehicles or on infrastructure deployment. So we should see some clarity around those two pathways here coming up on the 13th. And from there should be able to ideally make decisions as a business as to which direction that you might be headed, either with leveraging out your existing useful life, procuring new equipment through battery technology, battery electric technology, or hydrogen drivetrain technology, and most importantly, to be thinking about and looking at infrastructure. Unfortunately, in order to install the infrastructure, it does take time. As the old saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. We're at that point right now with the electric infrastructure. And I know that Ramiro and his team are here to answer questions because there's a great opportunity with a tremendous amount of money that's being made available from the state of California, not only for the truck, but also for the infrastructure as well that comes either through the utilities or through one of the agencies that exists in the state of California. So again, we are headed full long into this, and we should know exactly what our futures will look like come April of this year.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that overview, Matt. And before we transition into funding, I'm just curious, you work a lot with fleets, specifically drayage fleets. How aware are they of this? And what questions are they asking right now? If they're aware.
Right. Well, to keep it PG, the main question that we have is, how can they do this? Why are they doing this? The why, not so much because it's understandable. Obviously, the state of California is very aggressive when it comes to air quality measures, especially for heavy duty transportation. But the how can they do it is essentially a function of their statewide authority. So when we think about some of the air quality issues that we have in various regions throughout California, in the Central Valley, Southern California, the Bay Area, Sacramento, that are exceeding national ambient air quality standards, it gives the Air Resources Board some regulatory muscle in order to be able to pass regulatory policy on in-use heavy-duty and light-duty vehicles. And so those are a lot of the questions that I get are, how can they do this? But I will tell you that right now, for the most part, our members at least, we do a very, I guess, robust job in making sure that they understand exactly what the state of California is considering and what those standards mean for them. Because again, the drayage portion is relatively simple. It's just an entry standing starting in 2024. You get to leverage your useful life. And then ultimately in 2035, the state of California expects all drayage trucks to be zero emissions. So there is a little bit of runway leading up to that 2035 date, but at the same time, we are 11 months away from the first mandate, which will start here on 1/1/24 for any trucks that are registered to do business at ports or Class 1 intermodal rail yards here in California. So we try to keep everyone up to date and abreast as much as we can, especially working with our partners like Edison, like GNA to get the word out. So I think people understand it, but they might be in disbelief at this point in time that this is actually so close to happening. So generally, that's kind of the feedback that we get, Bree.
Great, thank you so much. And naturally, a lot of folks, when they hear about a requirement that is going to make them purchase something that's more expensive, they say, well, how am I going to pay for this? What help is out there for me? So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes doing a funding overview, and it is going to be more so focused on private trucking fleets than anything else. We have seen beyond this historic regulatory activity in California, we've seen historic investments at the federal level. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, these both brought in trillions of dollars into this space. A lot of that is not going to be applicable to the fleets that we're talking to on this call. And a lot of it isn't applicable to this space at all. Some of it is purely infrastructure as you think of it as far as a roadway, a waterway, a bridge, and those types of things. So the programs that I'm going to be talking about are applicable to Southern California. They are all items that are going to be available that are now or in the next 6 months. And I'm starting it off with infrastructure because, you know, you really can't start early enough with talking to your utility and understanding what your infrastructure needs are going to be. So I'm going to kick it off with infrastructure. I'm going to introduce a few programs. I'm then going to talk about vehicles, and then I'm going to talk about a few takeaways for 2023. This is not an exhaustive list. And if you find that these programs aren't a great fit for you for one reason or another, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and we can talk about your specific needs. So I'm going to talk about a few of these and then we'll turn it over to Ramiro so that he can tell you about how to get support for some of these programs. So on the infrastructure side, I'm going to kick it off with one that is open and available right now. So the Carl Moyer program is available throughout the entire state of California. A lot of SoCal Edison's customers are in the South Coast Air Quality Management District's territory. So this is about the South Coast Air Quality Management District's Carl Moyer program right up here up top. It's open now. It's going to be closing in the beginning of May. And for an infrastructure project that isn't publicly accessible, you can get up to 50% of your project costs covered. That's beyond just the hardware. That is going to include engineering, design. Maybe you want some battery storage or other items on site. So think about the entire cost of your project. This program could support up to 50% of that. Also, something worth calling out is that infrastructure is typically pretty stacking friendly. I know that that's a question we get on the vehicle side. We'll explore that more when we talk about vehicles. It's typically easier on the infrastructure side as long as you are not combining funding from the same funding source or for the exact same component and you're getting more than what you paid for that component. So with that said, you can stack the Moyer program with these Energy Commission opportunities that are below. These are talking about the CEC's Energize program. There are 4 lanes to that program, but there are 2 that are likely going to be most applicable to this audience. So the Fast Track program is for fleets that have already placed a purchase order for a battery electric vehicle, or maybe they already have some battery electric vehicles. They're on the Fast Track. This is going to open on a first come, first served basis in mid-February, and you can get up to 50% of your hardware and software costs covered, up to $500,000. If you qualify for the Jumpstart criteria, that bumps up to $750,000, but only if you qualify for that criteria. Okay, so with that said, if you are a fleet in a disadvantaged community, or public school in a disadvantaged community, or a nonprofit, or private or public transit, you would qualify for the Jumpstart lane of the Energize program. The opening date for that is not yet known, but similarly, it focuses on the hardware and software costs. Okay, you can take it to the next slide. I'm going to talk about vehicles now. So that Carl Moyer program, but before I do, real quick, you are seeing a few symbols to the right of these program names. That means that this is a program that qualifies for grant assistance from SoCal Edison, and Ramiro is going to talk you through that. And we're even going to get more into opportunities to get that hands-on support. So just know that that $ means you can get help from that program for free from SCE. The Carl Moyer program is up top. Similarly, it's open now through May, and for a battery electric heavy duty Class 8 vehicle, you can get up to $410,000. No, I'm not making that number up, but if you're not going for a Class 8 vehicle, that number is going to drop because the value of the incentive does depend on the weight class of your vehicle. Also, beyond the Carl Moyer program, you have a few other options. The next two are from the state level. So we have California's HVIP program. That is statewide, open now on a first come, first served basis. There are a few changes that happened to that program that I'm going to highlight on the next slide, but just know it has become a lot more friendly towards small fleets. Beyond those changes, it has a sister program called the Innovative Small E-Fleet program, which is only for fleets that have less than 20 vehicles and less than 15 million in annual revenue. It's like HVIP. You don't have to turn in any vehicle, no scrappage. However, it is an opportunity to get more than just your vehicle covered. You actually select a package. You could do trucking as a service, fleet as a service, or a lease agreement and get more money than you would through the traditional HVIP program because of your smaller size. Next, we have CARB's VW program for Class 8 trucks. As its name suggests, it's only for Class 8 trucks, so it is not going to be friendly towards anything lighter than that. It is open on a first come, first served basis, and you can get a flat $200,000 per truck. It's not a sliding scale like you see with the Carl Moyer program. It is $200,000 and it does require scrappage. Last but not least, we are going to see the return of the Southern California Association of Governments Last Mile Freight Program. You might be thinking, last mile? My trucks are way heavier than that. It's not last mile as in a small delivery van coming to your house per se. It could be a Class 8 tractor doing its final delivery to a Costco or a Lowe's or another area where people can go and buy the goods directly. It's that goods last mile. And that'll be returning sometime in early 2023, and you can get up to 50% of your costs covered, including infrastructure. All right, let's dig into a couple of these in a little bit more detail because they are opportunities that you can get support on right now. And so on the next slide, we are going to be talking about one of two opportunities. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper about the Carl Moyer program. We're diving in deeper again because you can get support for this program for free. And we want you to understand some of those initial eligibility criteria so that you know whether or not you apply. So I want to call out your attention to that bottom bullet. Scrappage is required, meaning you do have to turn in an eligible vehicle. That vehicle has to be between model year 2010 and 2017. If you do not have a vehicle in that range, this program is not going to be a good fit for you. It has 51 million available. That's going to go pretty quick though. It doesn't go as far as you think it would. It's friendly towards class 4 through class 8. And again, you could get up to 410,000 per truck. Next slide, please. Also right now, you do have a class 8 truck. You may decide that the VW program is a better fit for you. Why? Well, the 200,000 isn't a sliding scale. If you're eligible, there's funding remaining and you just want to know, I'm going to get that 200,000, I'm next in line, this would be an appropriate option for you. Similarly, it does require scrappage, and that scrappage requirement is a bit more strict. So you can see that in the bottom bullet here, that the eligible vehicle model years are between 2010 and 2012, and that's engine model year. All right, and then let's go ahead to my next slide, where I'm going to give a few, friendly reminder. Southern California Edison's territory covers beyond just the LA area. We know that there are customers with interest in the San Joaquin Valley, in the Antelope Valley, Kern, and the Mojave Desert. All of those areas have their own Carl Moyer programs. So even if you're outside of the South Coast area, there is an opportunity for you. So I just put a few of them on here. As you can see, most of them are open on a first come, first served basis, meaning if you're ready to do this right now and there's funding available, let's get you in line. We just need to make sure that you're eligible for the funding and your application is complete. So don't be spooked if you're outside of the LA area. There's opportunities for you elsewhere. Okay, and final slide from me, a few key takeaways. So one thing that I want to highlight that was part of the Inflation Reduction Act is a tax credit that is applicable to medium and heavy duty electric vehicles. It's $40,000. If you're going to get an EV, it's a no-brainer. Make sure you're taking advantage of this tax credit. There's no strings attached. There's no funny business. There's no catch. Just if you're getting an electric vehicle this year or over the next decade, make sure you're taking advantage of that tax credit. Also, I mentioned that HVIP had a few changes. So I do want to share that if you are a small fleet, you can stack with other programs that you couldn't stack with before. So best case scenario, you go after HVIP funding and you combine it with Moyer funding. As long as you aren't overpaying for the vehicle, you will be able to stack those incentives up to 90% of the total cost. So there's definitely more opportunities coming out of the HVIP program that are focused on small fleets. And on the flip side of that, they have included some changes that are going to make the program not as attractive for a larger fleet. Last but not least, this one's a little bit technical. I'll keep it short, but the Carl Moyer program increased its cost effectiveness cap again. It was $100,000 per ton NOx. That bumped up to $500,000 per ton NOx in 2021, and in 2022 is bumped up to $522,000 per ton NOx. That's important because when that cost effectiveness cap is low, a lot of times you have to lower your grant request to stay under that cap. So with that cap increased, you're able to request more money, which makes it easier, more attractive for you to go after it. So that is going to be the end of my funding update. So we've talked about regulations, we've introduced you to funding, and Ramiro, now I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can share how people can get help with some of these items.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ramiro Lepe. I'm one of the senior advisors on Southern California Edison's e-mobility team. And thank you to Matt and thank you to Brianna for going over all that detail that you did. So guys, now that you guys learned about regulations, you learned a little bit about funding, what types of opportunities, you may be left wondering with the very important question, which is which grant program is right for me and my fleet. Or possibly you might be thinking, how can my fleet take advantage of any of these grant programs that Brianna went over? Or you might even be in a scenario where you might be thinking, I have no idea where to start and this whole thing is super confusing. Either one of those scenarios, guys, it is truly okay. Believe me, I completely understand it. Yes, there are tons of programs out there, as you guys have seen. There's millions of dollars of grant funding that is available today. But one of the things I could tell you guys that these grant programs, the applications, the processes, they're super complex. And in order to get a grant, it's very, very competitive. So what Southern California Edison did is we actually created a program called the Grant Assistance Program back in 2022. Now, the entire goal of this particular program is to actually have us help you, our customer, ensure that your grant applications are complete and that they are competitive. If you guys could please go to the next slide. So there's two different ways that we could do that. So we have two types of EV grant funding opportunities that we want to present with you today. The first one would be the Grant Writing Assistance Program. And then we also have a grant package review. So essentially there's two different tracks of how you could take advantage of Edison's grant program in order to help your fleet offset the cost of transitioning to electric. Just move on to the next slide, please. Now, what is grant writing assistance? So essentially what we would do is we actually partnered up with our partners of Glassine Anderson Associates. An entire goal of grant writing assistance to help you all the way from the actual initial grant consultation with a grant writing expert to actually look and see which is gonna be the right grant program for your particular fleet with your particular scenario, gather all your application materials, and then ultimately get you ready for grant submittal. Now, under the Grant Package Review Assistance Program, think of it as an expert set of eyes that would be able to look at a completed grant application that you and your team might have developed, and we're just checking to make sure that you have everything that you need in order to remain competitive and increase your opportunities of actually receiving some sort of funding. Next slide, please. Now, how do you qualify for these particular programs? So this is strictly for Southern California Edison business customers that have medium or heavy duty trucks that are at least a gross vehicle weight rating of 6,000 pounds or above. You must also have plans or access to financing outside of your grant. So the grants are going to cover up to a certain amount. We also want to make sure that you do work with your finance company, potentially your dealers, or another third-party stakeholder that is helping you bridge that gap between what you are receiving in way of grants and what the actual final cost of the electric vehicle is. For the qualification program, we also have to make sure that you are purchasing at least 2 medium or heavy-duty vehicles and are receiving that first initial deployment of electric vehicles within 2 years from date of application. Or excuse me, with the contract with the grant writing agency. Now, for grant writing assistance, there is additional eligibility. So you do have to operate a fleet at least 50 or fewer on-road vehicles. You have to be located in a disadvantaged community, and that's by way of air quality. And your organization cannot be a Fortune 1000 company. Now, if you do have a fleet that is over 50, 50 fleet assets or more, we do have the grant package review assistance program that we can provide to you. And here, there's no fleet size requirement. And you would already have completed your grant application, and essentially you would have our partners at G&A review your grant for accuracy and then submittal. So for fleets that are 51 vehicles or larger, you would qualify potentially for grant package review assistance, but not for the actual grant writing assistance program. Okay, so next slide, please. Now you guys might be thinking, you guys, in a scenario where you guys might not be ready to submit a grant application at this point. That's totally okay. We also do have another program that we do offer at Southern California Edison called our EV Readiness Study. So think of this as that initial point. You guys are thinking about transitioning to electric. You have no idea where to start. You need questions answered. Questions such as how much power is available to the grid in my particular area, or what kind of electric vehicles are available in the marketplace, or even what's the cost of electricity versus diesel for my particular use case. So these are all questions that we do answer. And essentially what we do is we set up an hour-long consultation with you, your fleet, and one of our, specialists on our side, on the SCE side. And essentially we actually come up with the actual review for you, which we're going to do a total fleet and site study overview that's going to answer these questions and also get into financial incentive, grant opportunities, and your next steps as how you could get your infrastructure installed through our various transportation electrification programs. All right, next slide, please. All right, guys, so I am super excited to announce that we do have our very first in-person event coming on Wednesday, February 22nd at the Port of Long Beach. And from the hours of 2 to 5, what we're going to do is we're actually going to bring in G&A. We're going to bring in Matt Strapp and his team for the Harbor Trucking Association. And essentially, we're going to answer all your general questions about grants, about regulations, If you are ready and you're qualified, we can also help you even get your application started to start with our grant writing assistance program to whichever of these programs is right for you and your fleet. So I definitely want to personally invite you guys. There's going to be a link that's going to be put in the chat here shortly. So to register, there will be truck parking, we will be providing lunch, and ultimately we want to make sure that we arm you guys with the tools and the resources in order to make sure that you guys do meet these regulations as they might be coming through the pipe, and also ensuring that you get all your questions answered in an expeditious manner. So definitely invite you guys to that event, hoping to see you guys all there. And if you guys can please take it to the next slide, Brianna's going to cover what you would actually need to bring to this particular event.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ramiro. So luckily, there are a couple of programs, like we said, that are open now. The California VW program for Class 8 trucks, and then there's also the Carl Moyer program, which is friendly towards Class 4 through Class 8. They require the same type of documentation to apply. And so if you are interested in either of these, then please take a look at this list. I'm going to walk through it. These are the types of things that you need to be prepared to compile. Also, depending on how you plan on getting to the event, maybe you're driving your truck there, we can potentially do a lot of this in person. So we're going to meet you where you're at. You can show up with none of this and say, I don't know what I'm eligible for, help. Great, let's do that. You could show up and say, I'm going after this program and these trucks, and here's what I've got. I just need you to take a look at it. That's great too. So we just want you to be as prepared as possible. Like I said earlier, this is going to be shared with you following the call, so you'll have this checklist handy. And we just indicated what are pieces that maybe we could do in person versus items that will likely have to be completed ahead of time or after this initial workshop meeting with you. So there are pictures required for these programs, so you can take them yourself. We can take them there in person, and maybe if you've already taken them, we review them. You're also going to be required to provide your registration documentation and insurance documentation. The only difference between these two programs is that the VW program only requires 12 months worth of this documentation versus Carl Moyer, which is going to want to see 24 months worth of documentation. A couple of the items that you may not be prepared to bring, you may need us to talk it with you. One of them includes a vendor quote for the new vehicle. If you're not familiar with the options out there, we can talk about that. We can go through some resources we have on our side just so that you know what you have to pick from in this space. You may also have never, dug around to find an executive order. We do it all the time. So these are things that we'll be prepared to help you with. We really hope to see you there, and just, thank you for giving us the opportunity to support you. So with that, we are now going to jump into some Q&A. We've got a lot that we can dig into here. Please do continue to put in questions into the chat box. We're going to start with some that have come in. All right, so Ramiro, I'm going to kick it off to you first, because as soon as I introduced Carl Moyer and a few infrastructure programs, and you started talking about SoCal Edison and you have the Charge Ready Transport program, people want to know, can they take advantage of both?
Absolutely, great question, Brianna. So I can tell you guys, we do have a program. It's a low to no cost EV infrastructure installation program. It has tons of bells and whistles like charger hardware rebates. It has special commercial electric vehicle rates. They match our holidays and a lot of other cool things that we do offer with it. So it is called Charge Ready Transport, and the link will be dropped here in the chat shortly. And yes, you can definitely take advantage of our EV infrastructure installation program in conjunction with any of our grant writing assistance or EV readiness study program. So think of it like this, like if you're at the very beginning stage of electrification, you're thinking about it, you're not sure which direction to take, you would go with EV readiness study as a place to start. From there, naturally, the line of progression says, well, this all sounds great, we want to electrify, but these things are super expensive, how are we going to pay for them? That's when our grant writing assistance program kicks in. And of course, while you're doing that in tandem, the question is, where are you going to charge a darn thing? And that's actually when Charge Ready Transport will kick in. So essentially, we have something for everybody.
Awesome, thank you so much. And just to piggyback off of that, because I know folks are wondering, whoa, like, where does the stacking stop? If I can take advantage of Charge Ready Transport and Carl Moyer and potentially some of this Energy Commission funding, where does it end? And it is important to know where different programs have some restrictions. So for example, with the Carl Moyer program for public fleets, you can get the entire project cost covered. But if you're a private fleet, they do want to see that 15% of the project cost is not covered by an incentive. So when you are looking to combine that Energy Commission funding and the Carl Moyer funding, you are going to need to make sure that combined, they don't cover more than 85% of that total cost, because Moyer requires a private fleet to provide at least 15% cost share. And we can dig in more into the stacking. So Matt, for you, a question that naturally comes to mind, we're talking about incentives and we're talking about regulations. How do we think that ACF may impact a fleet's ability to take advantage of this funding?
Right. So luckily we're early within the regulatory policy at this point in time, because typically if you have a publicly funded vehicle outside of federal government funding, if it's coming from local or state, then you cannot use that truck to demonstrate a level of compliance if you're under some exemption pathway, like a fleet percentage phase-in. So it wouldn't necessarily count against you from a purpose of fleet size, but you wouldn't be able to take advantage of that towards your total overall percentages, traditionally how incentive funded vehicles work. And now on the drayage side, they will not prevent you from putting a truck into the drayage truck registry to be put into service if it's been funded by a grant. So the only time that it would really come in to, I guess, prevent you from leveraging that vehicle is if you are under some type of phase-in requirement, a percentage phase-in requirement for the high priority fleets under currently proposed ACF.
Appreciate that. And just something that has always been true is you've never in the state of California been able to use incentive funding to get into compliance with something that is required. And so early adopters are rewarded in that way of, I'm already out ahead of what's required and I can continue to take advantage of grant funding because I've already met what's required of me. And so I'm just going to continue to use funding to stay out ahead. So that's where we want to make sure everyone on this call can be. We can get you out as far ahead as possible. And of course, as this rule is finalized, we'll be able to provide more guidance there about what is the cutoff. When can I no longer, or when can I still use public dollars to help me get a new zero emission vehicle?
And there is one caveat, Bree, as well. You know, as far as a scrap and replace program, the truck you're using to scrap to turn in for the new truck must be in compliance with the existing rules. So statewide, obviously everyone needs to have a 2010 engine at this point in time, unless you're under some limited exemption pathway. So ideally that would mean that they're going to look at whether or not you're within your useful life schedule in order to be compliant and ergo eligible for some type of incentive funding. Like I said, since it's early in the program right now and that ACF has not been adopted, there are no restrictions essentially beyond you just need to have a 2010 or later engine and be within those categories for the individual programs, be it Moyer or VW. So a scrap and replace is going to look at the existing truck you're turning in to make sure it's in compliance. You can't go pull a truck, you know, from in the back of the yard and dust the cobwebs off to turn it in. It has to be actively operating, as was mentioned. You need to be able to show its mileage. You need to be able to show its registration. You need to be able to show its insurance. And so you can't just use any old truck to turn in for a scrap and replace. When you take money in a voucher pathway, like under HVIP, you don't have a scrap truck, but you still need to demonstrate that you're in compliance with the rule overall in order to be able to get the money. And that means that you would have vehicles that were within the useful life, or at least you're meeting your percentage thresholds under high priority fleet, if that's the pathway that you're looking at.
I just want to underline or underscore what you just said, because it's really important. The first part being you have to be in compliance in general in order to take advantage of funding. Even if there isn't a scrappage component, you have to already be in compliance. And then also we are getting some questions about, you know, why is scrappage required? And there are programs like HVIP, which are in existence to promote early adoption for technologies that you don't see as commonplace out there right now. And so there isn't that scrappage requirement, and the funding source for HVIP doesn't require that there needs to be a scrappage requirement, versus other programs like Volkswagen, which exists to make right something that happened in the past. And there has to be these emission reductions that can be calculated based off of the vehicle that's being taken off the road. Scrappage is an integral part of the just the performance of that program. And to what you said, I couldn't have said it better. You can't just take a truck, you know, out of your yard that you were about to just destroy anyway. They want to know that you did it early because of this grant funding that's being put your way. A lot of the programs we see have a minimum requirement that you could and would continue to operate that vehicle for another 3 years. But because of the grant funding, you're now taking it off the road early. Great. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Alrighty. I do see a question in here around timing. I think timing always comes up with these types of things. Not necessarily, this question wasn't necessarily around the regulatory timing of ACF, but Ramiro, for someone that is going through the charge ready transport process, how long does that typically take? And then I can just add a little bit more about the grant process.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Great question. So I could tell you, from date of application to an infrastructure-led program like Charge Ready Transport, to the time of the infrastructure is physically in the ground, you are looking at an average of a year to year and a half. Now, there's a lot of pitfalls that could happen, right? I mean, there's environmental concerns. You could run into easement issues, you know, back order on electrical equipment. You know, those are different things that we are encountering. So we always tell people, definitely, the more runway that you could give us, the better. Because essentially what we want to do is we want to avoid the scenario where you're getting a truck, or you know, and you don't have the physical infrastructure to actually charge it, right? So the earlier you could engage with utility, doesn't matter which utility you actually belong to, definitely make that call, make that connection, let them know of your actual plans, your EV acquisition plan. Because I can tell you guys, what we're doing is we're taking site-specific actual information. Like, we know that you're deploying, let's say, 100 day cabs over the next 10 years at any one particular site. The next call I'm making is to my grid strategy team so they can start working and ensuring that we meet you at that demand point. So those are some vital components for you to consider, just knowing that it does take a year to year and a half if all things go well, all right? So these are things that we definitely do want to stress, you know, to the public.
Great, thank you for that. And on the grant side, if you wanted to place an order for something right now, unless you're going after California's HVIP program, which requires you to place an order to participate, you likely have a nice 3 to 6 month runway at a minimum, because applying for a grant takes a month or so. Unless you have all your documents ready to rock and roll, you may have to order new engine tags. You may have to clear a lien off a title. That application process can take a couple of months. And then the agencies have to review everything before they can give you an award. And you know, you have to also review your contract before you're under contract. And those are the steps that need to be taken before you place that order or feel comfortable doing so. Technically, for these programs, you could place your order after you told you're getting an award, but before you have a contract. But you may just want to wait until you have that contract. So that can take 6 months, and then you have a nice 18-month to 24-month window to actually order and get that new vehicle. So on the grant side, it's easily a 2-year process. All right, so Matt, a question for you. People are asking about the possibility of retrofitting their existing trucks to convert them to a zero-emission vehicle. What are your thoughts there? Is there potential for retrofits?
Yeah, there is. I mean, it would not necessarily retrofit in the traditional sense, how we understand it in the industry. This is not an aftermarket piece of equipment that you're putting onto your truck to control pollution. It would actually be a full repower or conversion, which would effectively remove the existing internal combustion drivetrain and replace it with a battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell driven drivetrain. So there is the possibility for repower. The catch is that the state of California has to have certified that particular engine for being legal for sale and use in California. I know that there's a couple manufacturers out there now, not the traditional OEMs, But some smaller manufacturers, namely one from Australia that comes on the top of my mind, that actually is looking at battery swapping technology. They're looking at taking an existing truck, as long as it's no more than 7 years old, gutting it and putting in their own proprietary drivetrain and battery swapping technology, and then providing charging for the particular batteries that you would use to swap throughout the day. So this isn't something that the OEMs, the major traditional OEMs, have embarked upon yet, that being this battery swapping concept. But some of the conversions I've seen out there are considering a battery swapping type of application. So repowers, if you want to go to zero emissions, are legal to do, provided that certification has been issued by the state of California for that particular drivetrain.
Awesome, thank you. And you brought up another great point that is very relevant to grant funding, in that in California in particular, technologies do have to be CARB certified. And for folks on this call, you may be like, well, how in the world would I know? And if you know of a product, or you're exploring and you just want to confirm, hey, is this CARB certified, or do you know if it's in the works? Reach out to Matterek. We're happy to look into that for you. I know I'm used to navigating the CARB website to check out all of their existing executive orders for those certifications. So great call out just about, grant funding, particularly in California. It can't just be for anything out there that you've heard about. You do have to make sure that it is CARB certified. Okay, so Ramiro, one for you, and I think this is really relevant to a lot of people on the call, has to do with people that lease where they're parking their trucks. So in those types of situations, how do they navigate that? Is the Charge Ready Transport program friendly towards lease sites? Is it just the owner that would then, the landowner, go through the process? How does a leasing scenario work?
Yeah, great point, Brandon. So I can tell you guys, Charge Ready Transport specifically, it is a vehicle-driven program. So for every one electric vehicle that is purchased, you are allotted ability to install one port. So in a scenario where somebody leases, and a little history myself, my father, he does the same thing. He's got a trucking company, he leases a yard, he parks, and he goes in the same scenario, right? So we've had this conversation several times. In a scenario like this, I can tell you, we have programs like Rule 29, which is a non-charge ready transfer program, but it's specifically designed for public infrastructure programs. And I can tell you, today, there are plenty of public charging as a service and trucking as a service providers that are coming to the marketplace, including some within the Port of Long Beach and other locations along that 710 and 110 corridor, where there is public infrastructure plans already being developed or in conversation. So in the event of this particular scenario, the landowner could reach out to us, and if there is some sort of vehicle acquisition involved, or we'd have to have a conversation to see exactly how that would lie, there might be a possibility where somebody could utilize Charge Ready Transport. And at worst case, there is that Rule 29 option where we still do utility side upgrades and support public infrastructure projects to help individuals that are leasing. So these are definitely something that the conversation could get a little complex, and we would have to do a deep dive into the specific scenario to see which is going to be the best path to electrification. But we do definitely want to have these conversations and make sure that we do answer these questions. So if anybody has any specific questions or wants to discuss that, I am always available and able to have a conversation with you guys and go over your specific scenarios, and ultimately trying to create that framework for infrastructure installation success from our end.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'll take a couple of these. I've been fielding them out to you, but I'll give you a little break here. We do have some questions that came in about the VW program. Someone asked if that program was applicable to TRUs and terminal tractors. The VW program is not. Carl Moyer is. So Carl Moyer would fund TRUs on a case-by-case basis. And terminal tractors fall under the cargo handling equipment and are looked at as off-road pieces of equipment. I know they can be registered for on-road. You could also look to HVIP's sister program, CORE, which is currently closed for support for both TRUs and terminal tractors. And then another question came in, are these incentives applicable to government fleets? And the answer is yes. And the cool thing about public fleets is a lot of times there is more flexibility around stacking. You can often stack to cover the entire cost of the project versus a percentage of it. And then some of the caps that apply to private fleets aren't at play for a public fleet. HVIP in particular comes to mind. So yes, the Carl Moyer program and the HVIP program and the VW program are all friendly towards public fleets as well. Alrighty, so we have talked on this call about disadvantaged communities. So could either of you, I don't know if whoever wants to take it, can you tell people how they can determine whether or not they're in a disadvantaged community? I can take it too, because I
Sure,
live in
and
that
maybe Bree, you
space.
can elaborate on that. Guaranteed, if you're running a trucking business, it's more than likely in a disadvantaged community. There is something called CalEnviro Screen that you can look up, put your zip code in to see where exactly you fall within these disadvantaged communities. I'm not sure, do we still call them disadvantaged communities? I think it's like environmental justice zones now or something. So very likely in Southern California especially, it's difficult to not be in one of these designated areas and be working in some type of heavy industrial. So very likely you as a trucking company operator, wherever you're garaging those vehicles would be what would be looked at for whether or not you qualify for the enhancement relative to the DAC. I don't know, Bree, if you want have something else to add to that. That was pretty skinny definition there.
Nope, that was perfect. I was going to direct people to CalEnviro Screen as well. And, you know, using that tool, you can type in your address. And then if you are in the top quartile above 75%, you are considered in a disadvantaged community. Okay, all right. So we have a couple of questions here that I'm going to put out to the group that are more about the vehicles themselves. And so, you can pass on it if you don't want, but we have some folks asking about range. One example given was, would one of these vehicles be able to travel the distance, the 270 miles from Southern California to Las Vegas? What do we think?
Well, how much?
Because I can tell you it's very.
Go ahead, Romero.
Yeah, I was just going to mention it really depends on the OEM, what the topography looks like. I mean, there's so many different components when you're looking at battery range. The actual charging station itself. How much load, how much GVW are you actually taking from LA to Vegas, as an example. So to answer the question, I mean, there's definitely. It depends. I mean, you'd have to definitely, get what the battery manufacturer, the OEM, and figure out exactly, what your plan would be. And I can tell you guys, as technology is progressing, I'm seeing a lot of advances in that particular space. And one of the big ones being range anxiety. I mean, I just drove a F-150 Lightning for the very first time, drove an electric vehicle, and it was a little scary, right? You're coming in, you're kind of doing your fleet planning before you start, operating the vehicle, saying, okay, well, here's a couple charging stations along the way to my route, so that way I can make sure I get it there successfully, right? So a lot of it does come to the planning range of it. So definitely suggest definitely route optimization strategies, talking to the OEMs, finding out what new technologies are coming out. Those are all things that are important to determine the feasibility of going electric with today's technology.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I'm sorry to chat it over you there, Romero. I mean, my answer is how much intestinal fortitude do you have? Because, the OEMs are going to talk about effective range. They're going to talk about, what they're able to accomplish in kind of that best case scenario. And Romero nailed it. It depends on how heavy you're hauling and what the geography looks like to getting you there, right? If you're just at highway speeds the entire time, you're going to drain those batteries out, as opposed to if you're doing a lot of stop and start to get that regenerative braking, get some more charge back into the battery. And the bigger the battery pack, of course, the heavier the truck is, which means a capacity loss. So if you have very large batteries to kind of get into that 300 mile lane, you're going to be hauling a lot of batteries to do so. So right now, it's challenging for people to try to think that you're going to be able to make it to like Vegas or Phoenix, for that matter, on a single charge. It's probably not something that I would recommend to folks. And it's challenging because obviously, while the technology is advancing, while we're building out infrastructure, we're still looking at a 1/1/24 mandate from the state of California, regardless of whether or not the trucks, quote unquote, work in particular lanes. Hydrogen is just not far along enough commercially speaking. So battery electric really is a better pathway initially here, especially for short haul folks. And you have such great partners in SoCal Edison, in some of the other utilities, that they have programs that were, cleared through the Public Utilities Commission to invest into additional infrastructure. So it's very important to take advantage of those opportunities while they're available, because as the regulation kicks into full gear, you start to see less and less incentive opportunities, since, as Bree mentioned earlier, state funding cannot be used to pay for compliance. So these are things that you need to start having conversations with your OEMs, as Ramiro mentioned. Really need to understand your duty cycles, when you have the capability to charge. Obviously in the harbor, especially if we're slip seating, the time between the two shifts is right at peak demand charge time. So one cool thing about Charge Ready is that if you sign a contract with them, you don't have to worry about demand charges for a certain amount of time. So there's some great opportunity here for incentive funding, and having resources like Edison or HTA and GNA and trying to get this, I think, is important, so you can start having these conversations with yourself and with your fleet, and where you fit in. Also, got to start having those customer conversations as well, because if you're looking at purchasing a vehicle, even with incentives that might cost twice as much out the door, you're going to have to make up for that somewhere. So bringing your customers into this discussion as well about where they would want to see your fleet, its capabilities relative to the regulatory requirements, it's important to start having those discussions right now.
Thank you so much for that from both of you. And I'll just add, because we got a question, and the previous question mentioned Las Vegas, which is outside of the state of California, is grants are going to want to see that the majority of your activity is within the state. HFIT, for example, requires 100% in state, unless you request permission ahead of time to operate outside of the state for up to 25% of the time. The South Coast Carl Moyer program is going to want to see a certain percentage. And if you're in another air district like Mojave or Kern or Antelope Valley, they're going to want to see a certain percentage there. So just make sure that as you approach these incentives, you know that you can commit to operating the vehicle in that area for at least that amount of time for the extent of your entire contract. I cannot believe how quickly this hour has gone by. And so Matt and Ramiro, if there are closing thoughts, I'll give you a little bit of time. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and tell folks how they can continue to be engaged.
Yeah, guys, I'll just drop it off with saying, appreciate all you guys being here. Absolutely means everything to us that you did attend today. Of course, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, grant writing assistance, EV readiness study, charge rate transfer, Rule 29, or just any general questions up, see if you have the GNA staff, could please drop my information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me personally, and definitely love to help you guys create that framework for infrastructure and electrification success.
My final thoughts, everyone out there, is, ask those questions, leverage those resources that are available to you right now, see what your fleet looks like, if you're even have the capability to move to this advanced technology platforms, and what pathway might be the best for you. There's a lot of money out there right now. Don't miss out on taking advantage of these opportunities, these grants, although they might seem daunting. Once you start getting down into it, especially when you have a little outside help, it's, about 30-40 minutes of your time for potentially, $400,000. So you can do the math on that to see how much they'll be paying you per minute to fill out this information and gather up the info. So there's some great resources out there. Definitely use them.
Thank you again. And so for those that are attending now, if you are ready to connect with someone right now, you have a couple of options. You can submit an interest form through SCE's website, and I know that we have that on the screen. We also have a hotline that's available, and so you can call right now, 310-237-5480, and you will be connected with an expert to talk you through grant opportunities and other things. And again, the event, we hope to see you there. We will be following up with you with an email with the recording of this webinar. It will be posted on ACT News. And again, we have that survey for you at the end here. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon.